At the heart of Boston's world-class collection of great neighborhoods, unparalleled talent pool, and dense network of transportation infrastructure is the city's rapidly emerging Seaport district. Boston's Seaport is a growing neighborhood created from scratch on a scale unlike anything else in the United States.
And look at that dark image. It's a dumpster moving down the street, floating down the street.
Seaport residents and workers surprised by the flooding.
Holy cow, where are we? Is this really happening down the Seaport?
Taking a look at some flooding images from the Seaport in Boston earlier on today. Something you don't want to do.
Boston's Seaport District was developed following the 2008 financial crisis as a way to foster new business for the city. Today, it's booming with large corporations and high-end housing. But its location on the water also makes Seaport particularly vulnerable to flooding during extreme weather events like the bomb cyclone in 2018. As climate change continues to increase the severity of storms and contribute to sea level rise, the threat worsens, leaving people's property and homes at risk. To understand why, we must first understand the three main causes of sea level rise: the rapid melting of glaciers and ice sheets, warming oceans, and gravity.
So about 25,000 years ago, we had these large ice sheets covering parts of the world. When you had that large ice sheet sitting on land, it actually pushed down the surface below it. Sort of like putting a bowling ball on a memory foam mattress. Sort of pushes that land down. Around that bowling ball, you have sort of mattress that comes up, that forms sort of a bulge around the bowling ball. When all that ice melted about 10,000 years ago, the Earth is slowly going back to that sort of flat state. You know, that mattress is slowly sort of settling back in to where it was.
Boston sits on one of the bulges that was once furthest from an ice sheet, meaning that the land, and consequently the sea around it, has been slowly rising for the last 12,000 years.
Another component is heating of the oceans. So when you heat the oceans, your water actually expands, which can cause sea level to rise. So that combines with ocean currents and circulation to cause rising sea levels here in Boston.
The third factor has to do with water's gravitational pull, which we see at work in the ocean's tides. Large ice sheets and mountain glaciers attract the water around them. When melting shrinks them, their gravitational pull weakens and the water dissipates. This makes for a global pattern of sea level change that differs by region. In Boston, it results in sea level rise. That first factor is out of our control. It's a natural process resulting from the last ice age. But those other two factors, warming oceans and melting ice sheets, those are partly within our control. Our reluctance to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions has already had detrimental effects. In 2016, a city report projected Boston sea levels to rise 8 inches by 2030, which would put Seaport's waterfront entirely underwater. By 2070, that number could quadruple.
When you think about sort of small amounts, millimeters or inches per year, it seems really small and very sort of not important to people along the coast. Except if you think about just a little bit every single year, that adds when you have a storm, when you have really high tides. So while you don't see it every single day, when you have these larger events, the consequences are that much more severe.
The City of Boston has already taken steps to address the threat of sea level rise. In October 2018, the city released a comprehensive plan called Coastal Resilience Solutions for South Boston, which includes future actions the city will take toward flood protection and resilience.
So that can range from strategies like increased harbor walk to new and protected and resilient parks like Martin's Park that is newly built along the coast of the Fort Point Channel, to longer term priorities.
Harbor walks and resilient parks serve as buffers for coastal storms and flooding so that nearby roads and buildings are less affected. While the costs associated with implementing these flood barriers are high, between $48 and $55 million, they could prevent tens of millions of dollars in direct physical damage and displacement costs over time. But privately owned properties rely on developers to take the threat of sea level rise seriously.
So there is an overall resiliency checklist that everyone has to fill out as part of a large project review process with the City Planning Authority.
Included in the checklist are things like building elevation, flood resilience, and adaptation strategies for sea level rise. But developers are not required to adhere to what the checklist recommends.
So a lot of it, unfortunately, is just market driven, and I think that puts more of a burden of responsibility on us as builders and designers and developers as they develop to think about how do we creatively attack this problem that we can still build new buildings and give people, Class A office space or the best residences that they could imagine, but doing it in a way that doesn't compromise the buildings or the city's ability to withstand future climate shocks.
Sustainability is not always the cheapest or most attractive option. For example, Seaport is known for its glass buildings, and tenants love them for their views. But with all those windows, glass buildings can be hard to insulate. Developers sometimes have to choose between turning the highest profit and sticking to their sustainability goals.
I used to work on Boston Harbor on the boats, and I've known sea level's been rising, and it's been awful. And there's not much people are doing about it.
I think through learning about how little time we have left to make substantive change on a bigger level, I've realized that I can't just do things in my own personal life. I have to sort of help get everyone on board with making bigger changes.
The point of this action is to disrupt business as usual in Boston and to make this crisis unavoidable for people who can afford to ignore it.
I think it's saying it very loud and clear. We don't have any time. We have zero time. And I've known it for a long time, but there hasn't been enough of a movement to be able to get the kind of momentum that we've needed.
My oldest is 4.5, so I think at that age she's learning most by observing and seeing what we do, and that's why I think it's so important to not just talk about it.
The most important thing that you can do is to ask for change from the city, to let your city councilor, to let the mayor, to let the environment department and other staff at the city know that it is on your mind, that you want a safe place to live for years into the future.
Boston has planned for the next 30 years, but for the city to survive for future generations, more must still be done.
Because it's going to take all of us working together to achieve this vision and this protection. The city, the state, the federal government, private developers, homeowners. This is something we're all going to have to tackle together.
And the city of Boston lies within the state of Massachusetts, which lies within the Northeast region, which lies within the United States. And everyone at all these different scales is going to have to ultimately work together.
So it's a problem that we have to address. And it's a problem that affects you even if you don't believe in climate change. Whether you believe that humans cause climate change or not, the oceans are rising. We observe it, and it is continuing. So it's something that we have to deal with.
Which side are you on, my people? Which side?